What's up, everyone? Welcome to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about the Season 4 long range meta. It's a pretty open meta, but I think we can find a few little outliers that kind of separate themselves from the pack and are a little better than the rest of the guns. So we're going to go over all that today. If you guys appreciate the content, you like the website, all the work we do on that, don't forget to drop a subscription to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment as well. Let's get into it straight away here. So we're going to start with what I consider like the low recoil assault rifles. So we have the Lachmann 5.56 in red, the ISO Hemlock in orange, the TAQ-56 in blue, and then the Castov 545 in green. So we've got 300 health, combination shot location. So this is just the standard TTK calculation here. So you can see the ISO Hemlock has been absolutely destroyed. It's just awful now. Not even worth considering. And then it looks like the two best time to kill on this chart are going to be the Castov 545 and the Lachmann 556. You can see the red Lachmann 556 in red down there has the best time to kill from about 25 meters all the way out forever, but it has a lot better time to kill from like 25 to 55. So it really kind of separates itself from the pack there, just having better time to kills than the other low recoil assault rifles. So as far as that goes, this is going to probably be the easiest weapon that has the best time to kill combined with being really easy recoil to control. So I think for just regular assault rifles, low recoil assault rifles, Lachmann 556 separates itself from the other options. Next up, we're going to go over the LMGs. So LMGs obviously are heavier, they're slower, but with this update to 300 health, so now you have 150 base health and 150 armor health. Basically, the increase in damage per mag that you get from these LMGs is really beneficial in a lot of fights. So even though they're really heavy, really slow, it's much more of an LMG meta than it has been in the past even. So I've got the HCR in red on this graph, the Socken in orange, the RPK in blue, and the Raw MG in green. Right off the bat, you can see the HCR has the best time to kill in the first damage range at 729 milliseconds. So it's pretty good in that first damage range out to about 25 meters. If you extend that with a barrel, obviously it could get out to like 35, 40 meters. So that's good right off the bat. And then you can see the HCR also has pretty consistent TTK out at range, kind of middle of the pack, a little bit better than the Socken, a little bit better than the RPK out at range. The RPK's TTK is not great compared to these other options, but it fits more in with that like low recoil AR that we just talked about in the first segment. So it's not super fair to compare it to these LMGs. It would fit more in with that graph, and it would have a little bit better time to kill than most of those options, but it does have a little bit more recoil than those options as well. So that's why it's included on the LMG graph, as well as just being an LMG. Obviously, the Raw in green has phenomenal time to kill. It has the best time to kill out at range past 35 meters of all of them, but it's just the recoil is so hard to control that it's really not viable. The Socken MG38 is comparable to the Raw out to the last damage drop off, and then it gets about 150 milliseconds slower than the Raw, but absolutely the recoil is much easier to control on the Socken than the Raw. So I think if I had to compare those two, I would personally always pick the Socken over the Raw just because of that increased accuracy that I get. The Raw actually doesn't have terrible actual recoil, but the visual recoil and screen shake is just atrocious. So it's really difficult for me to use. Some people love it, and if you can use it, it pretty much does have the best time to kill of any option out there. So something to consider, maybe something to try out, see if you can deal with that visual recoil. But out of all these options, I think the two that stand out the most are the HCR and the Socken. I think the HCR is a step above the Socken just because it has that phenomenal time to kill in that first damage range. And to me, the recoil is less, I don't know how to describe it, but the recoil with the Socken like kind of like torques your whole screen, kind of like shifts your screen around. And I don't like that. I think the HCR for me works a little bit better, more accurate, as well as having that better time to kill in the first damage range, and then also a better time to kill at extreme ranges. Another weapon that I think is very good is a battle rifle, the TAQ-V. So we just came out of the Cronin Squall being the meta, which I'm not even going to show you guys the Cronin Squall. It has been absolutely destroyed. They nerfed it into the ground. Not a viable option whatsoever anymore, so don't use that. But if you want something similar, the TAQ-V is a great option. So I've taken the winner of the low recoil ARs and the winner of the LMGs, and I've stuck the TAQ-V on this same chart. So we got the TAQ-V in red, the HCR 56 in blue, and then the Lachmann 556 in orange. So you can see right off the bat, the TAQ-V in red here has the best time to kill at all ranges compared to those other two weapons. It's not a dramatically better time to kill than the HCR, but it is still better. And the HCR is probably a little bit more accurate for most people. It has less actual recoil. and the visual shake on the TAQ-V is pretty bad. But after the first like 5 shots or so, the TAQ-V's recoil is very, very manageable. And with these longer time to kills, with the 300 health change, um, you're gonna be shooting 15, 20, 30 shots without ever letting go of the trigger. So you're gonna get deeper into that mag than you used to, and you're gonna get to that lower recoil portion of the recoil pattern. So I think the TAQ-V is absolutely a meta choice. I'm gonna say these three are all meta choices: the TAQ-V, Lachmann 556, and HCR for different reasons. As I've covered in this video, the TAQ-V is gonna have the best time to kill, but probably gonna be the hardest to hit shots with for most people, while still being able to hit shots. The Lachmann 556 is going to be the easiest to use for sure, and it's going to be much faster than the HCR in terms of ADS time, movement speed, things like that, because the HCR is an LMG and the Lachmann 556 is an AR. And then the HCR is kind of a nice middle ground. It's going to have a little bit easier recoil than the TAQ-V, while still having really good time to kill, still huge damage per mag, and pretty easy recoil, all things considered. I want to add on to this chart the SO14 so you guys can see this. So SO14 is a single shot weapon. It's very much, if you played Warzone 1, very much like the DMR was in Warzone 1. It has great time to kill, but this is like a theoretical time to kill that's like the maximum possible time to kill, like the best time to kill you can possibly have. And in reality, the SO14's maximum fire rate is almost 500 RPM, but nobody can click that fast. Nobody can pull the trigger that fast on a controller. So this really isn't accurate. Like the actual time to kill here is not accurate, but what you can do with the single shotgun is shoot it a little bit slower and be really accurate with it. So the SO14, a lot of people think is far and above like the best weapon in the game right now. I think it is probably very good. It's kind of a high skill ceiling gun in my opinion. Like it takes a lot of skill to use. It's kind of like the TAQ-V in that regard, where it's really good, but it takes a lot of skill to use, a lot of time to get used to it. But I do want to include it because I do think it is a meta choice as well. Something I want to mention though is the damages of single fire TAQ-V. So TAQ-V by default is automatic. SO14 by default is semi-auto. And then if you switch the fire method on both of those, then obviously they swap. And they have almost exactly the same damage profile on single fire. So we're going to compare the TAQ-V damage to the SO14 damage and talk about that some. All right, so like I said, the TAQ-V on semi-auto does basically exactly the same damage as the SO14 on semi-auto, and that leads to an interesting decision. So basically, the SO14 is easier to control on single fire than the TAQ-V is on single fire, but it's way harder to control if you switch to automatic. And the TAQ-V is much easier to control on automatic and harder to control on single fire. So it's an interesting thing to think about. If you want to use the gun more often on automatic, then you would probably want to go with the TAQ-V. But what's cool about it is you can swap over to semi-auto anytime you need to and just basically treat it like the SO14. And then if you wanted a gun that was, more single fire, you should definitely go with the SO14. And then if you needed to melt someone up close, or maybe like 20, 30, 40 meters in that closer range, then you could just pop the SO14 on automatic and use it that way. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. So if you look at these damages here, I've got the SO14 in the first column, TAQ-V second column, and then this is the first damage range, second damage range, third damage range. So in the first range, you can see the damage values are almost exactly the same between the two guns when they're both on semi-auto. Second damage range is almost identical as well. The SO14 does more to the head in some cases, but the TAQ-V does more to the other shot locations in most cases. TAQ-V also has slightly longer drop-offs, damage drop-offs, than the semi-auto of the SO14. So I think, for me personally, I will probably use the TAQ-V. I like the TAQ-V. I think it feels really good, and I like to use automatic weapons more than semi-auto weapons. So it's just an interesting thing to think about because they're so similar in terms of how the damage values come out. Getting into the recommended builds now. So this is the Lachmann 556 that I personally think is the best. So these muzzles are just super valuable. We've got the X10 ported 290 muzzle. This is basically all vertical recoil. There's a little bit of horizontal in there as well. The Lachmann on the first 4 or 5 shots kind of jumps up a little bit, and like the reticle will shift away from the center of your screen. And the X10 ported 290 really helps with that. So it helps you hit those first few shots. After that, the recoil is so manageable. Tunings for that attachment. So we got plus 0.39 ounces towards recoil stabilization and plus 0.12 towards recoil control. Then we have the FTAC Ripper. That's pretty standard on all long range weapons. If you look at the actual stats on TGD, you might be confused why we pick that so often. And it's because there's hidden things. Like we don't have all the numbers. The FTAC Ripper seems to really help with, the visual shake of the gun, as well as the bounciness of the recoil as it goes up the recoil pattern. It's kind of like the Commando foregrip from Warzone 1, but it doesn't seem to have as much of an effect as that attachment did, but it's the same idea. So that's why we pretty much always pick this. And the aiming stability is really nice, so it gives you a huge boost to your aiming stability, so the gun won't sway around as much, and that is pretty important for long range weapons. Tunings, we got all the way towards recoil stabilization on the vertical, and then plus 0.28 inches towards aiming idle stability. High velocity, this is just a ridiculously valuable attachment. It has no negatives and gives you 44% bullet velocity extra, which is pretty crazy. So this one we're going to tune all the way to bullet velocity on the horizontal, and then minus 0.58 grams towards recoil smoothness. It's our only bullet velocity attachment, so we want to maximize that bullet velocity as much as possible. Optic is personal preference, so you can try some different optics, see if you like them. This has low enough recoil, you might even be able to get away with a higher zoom optic like the Schlager 3.4x, but I tend to still prefer these like red dot sights. So Slimline Pro tuning, I talked about this in the previous video, but now that we have these damage caps, so basically headshot damage is kind of gone in the first damage range. Before, I was almost torn on whether or not you wanted flinch resistance, because sometimes flinch could, flinch you into hitting a headshot if you were hitting chest shots before. But now it's like you just don't want flinch, period, because headshot damage is kind of gone. So you just want maximum flinch resistance all the way to that side, and then close versus far for the optic is personal preference. Close tends to have a better sight picture. Far will have slightly less visual recoil, visual shake. So that's personal preference. I usually prefer close just because I like to have a clean picture of the target. So taking this Lachmann 5.56 into the range, there's so much smoke from the weapons in the range that it can be kind of hard to see, but this thing is just an absolute beam. I think that muzzle is by far the best, just because those first few shots really do jump normally, but this thing just feels like it just has no visual recoil, no actual recoil. It's so accurate. And it has the best time to kill of like the 4 weapons that I think really feel that accurate. This one has the best time to kill, so that's why we picked this one. Next up, TAQ-V. It's going to be basically the same build that we had for the Lachmann, just taken to the TAQ-V, and we have a different muzzle. So TAQ-V's recoil is already very straight vertical, so again, we want to reduce that as much as possible. The Tempest GH50 is fantastic for that. It reduces that vertical recoil very well. So the tunings for this, plus 0.39 towards recoil stabilization on the vertical, plus 0.27 towards recoil control on the horizontal. FTAC Ripper for the same reasons I went over on the Lock 5.56, just a great attachment all around. Plus 0.52 towards recoil stabilization, plus 0.32 towards aiming idle stability on the horizontal. High velocity, same reasons as the Lachmann again. Just want more bullet velocity for a long range weapon. It's easier to hit those shots. So we're going plus 0.29 grain towards bullet velocity, and then minus 0.27 grams towards recoil smoothness. 50 round drum, we just want high damage per mag for trios, quads, and even some of the smaller modes, duos now with 300 health. Sometimes you might still want big mags like that. Optic is personal preference. Again, usually you just use a 1x on this, but I wanted to mention this hybrid firepoint optic as an option because of what I mentioned about the TAQ-V. It has the same crazy damage that the SO14 does when you swap it to single fire. So if we go into the range here and look at this, this is what it looks like when you're not toggled to the red dot. But if you toggle to the red dot, it's just a normal red dot like you'd have on anything else. So single fire, it still works really well with this red dot. But then if you wanted to, you could swap it to single fire and then toggle that hybrid back to this. And all of a sudden you've got this really high damage for mag, high zoom. Like this is basically going to be as very close to as good as the SO14, but it's just going to be better than the SO14 at range on automatic. So it's a trade-off there. The SO14 is fantastic as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I just wanted to mention this optic because it's actually pretty good. It could be, this is one of the rare cases where a hybrid might be, a really good pick. All right, on to the HCR 56. I think this thing's pretty nasty as well. It's definitely a top tier choice because it kind of has everything going for it. It has low recoil, has high bullet velocity, and has pretty good time to kill as well. So it's a great choice. Definitely a meta option. I think all 4 of the weapons I talked about, TAQ-V, SO14, HCR, and Lachmann are meta options, but just kind of try them out, see which one you like the most. So we got the Komodo Heavy. This is the horizontal recoil muzzle for this HCR, and that's because the recoil kind of snakes a little bit. We want to shrink that horizontally as much as possible. It makes it much easier to hit shots at range, and it doesn't have that much vertical recoil to start with, so we don't really need to worry about that too much. So the tunings for this, plus 0.62 ounces towards recoil stabilization, then plus 0.1 in 0.10 inches towards recoil control on the horizontal. FTAQ-Ripper for the same reasons as before for the other weapons. Tuning plus 0.57 on vertical and plus 0.28 on horizontal. High velocity ammunition, same reasons as the other weapons, just want the highest bullet velocity, helps you hit those shots at range. Makes it so when someone changes direction, you can still hit them. You don't have to predict their movement as well when you have high bullet velocity. Tuning plus 0.36 grams towards damage range, and then plus 7.55 grain towards bullet velocity. Then VLK 7mm. So this weapon comes with a 60 round mag and shoots pretty slow, so you already have really high damage per mag. You don't really need to swap to a higher magazine. If you're someone that likes a bigger magazine, you could take this laser off and put the 100 round on. It actually doesn't penalize this weapon very much. It's only like 15 or 20 milliseconds of ADS time, which is pretty crazy. So it is an option if you were someone that just wants a giant mag. This is a great weapon to choose for that. But the 7mm laser is just so good, helps with ADS time so much, and also aiming stability, which I've talked about is really important. So this makes your recoil very consistent, having good aiming stability. So we've got basically in the center for the vertical tuning, and then all the way plus 51 feet towards aiming idle stability on the horizontal. Optic, again, is personal preference. So I'm not going to go over that again, but Lachmann 556, I talked about how to tune the optic for your preferences. So if they take this into the range, ADS time is going to be pretty slow. It is an LMG. Even with that laser, it's still pretty slow. But the recoil is great. And like I said, the time to kill is pretty good. I think the Lachmann 556 feels a decent bit more accurate than this weapon to me. But it's going to be personal preference. I just feel like this has a little bit more movement left to right than the Lachmann 556 does. So it's a little harder to predict and hit all those shots at longer ranges. All right, last up here we have the SO14. Again, this is basically exactly the same as the TAQ-V, except the auto fire of this is much harder to control. So you're really not going to be using this on auto very much. But if you were inside like 30 meters or so, this does have better time to kill than the TAQ-V does by quite a bit on automatic, if they're both on automatic. And you can still hit shots inside that range with this gun. So if you were ever maybe towards like end game, if you were in an end game situation, you would swap this hybrid to the red dot sight and swap to automatic, and you could just fry people up close with this thing. So something to consider. But basically, we've got the Lockshot KT50. This is has a little bit of vertical and horizontal, more towards the vertical recoil. The first few shots of the SO14 when it's on semi-auto jump up a bunch, so we want to reduce that as much as possible. But horizontal is still really important. So we've got that one to help with a little bit of both of those. The guys I talked to, Art is War, they said that the bullet velocity on this gun, like they much preferred having more bullet velocity than better recoil. I've used this thing in the firing range, and I'm not sure I agree with that. I think the bullet velocity of putting a suppressor on here is maybe not worth it. But using the Boremaster barrel, we do get an extra like 20% bullet velocity over just using high velocity. So that's why I picked the Boremaster barrel. It also helps with recoil a little bit more. So pretty good there. I forgot to go over the tunings of the lock shot, so let's do that real fast. We got plus 0.49 towards recoil stabilization, minus 0.24 towards aiming idle stability. And then for the Boremaster barrel, plus 0.16 pounds on the vertical, and then plus 0.25 inches towards damage range on the horizontal. High velocity for the same reasons as always. Tuning's minus 0.32 grams towards recoil smoothness. And then horizontal didn't seem to be good either way, so we just left it in the center there. 50 round mag. This thing has huge damage per mag, just like the TAQ-V does, just gigantic damage per mag, especially on single fire. And then this optic is really interesting again. So let's take this into the firing range. It starts on single fire by default. So on single fire, you can kind of just put it all in the same spot. So this is why people like it. It's just the recoil after the first couple bullets, it just goes to the same spot over and over, and has no problem just hitting this target over and over and over. But like I said, you could swap to automatic, swap to single fire, or yeah, swap to automatic, and then swap the hybrid to red dot sight if you're ever in end game. Like that's not a range right there where you want your SMG out, but this thing has no problem just beaming that target at that range on automatic. So it does have hard recoil, and it's not going to be nearly as controllable for something out like at that range, like 60 meters or so. I would not use it. And there's never been a build that I could find that worked. I've tried because it has the best time to kill, but I just can't find a build that really works. But for these close range targets here, I mean, that one even's kind of pushing it. That's like 25, 30 meters, and you can see I'm still missing some shots on that. So I don't know. I like the versatility of the TAQ-V over the SO14 because of this. Basically, the recoil on auto on the SO14 is only going to be usable inside like 30, 40 meters. whereas the TAQ-V on auto can be used all the way out, and they're both usable on semi-auto. So it's kind of a trade-off. Decide what you think is more important. I personally think I lean towards the TAQ-V being my choice over the SO14. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, don't forget to drop a subscription to the channel if you want to see more content like this. Drop a like on the video, drop a comment on the video. Best way to support TGD, as always, is a premium subscription to TrueGameData.com, the website that I built with the help of I Am Gamer Girl, Christina. So I just want to mention that. That's always the best way to support. We get like 95+% of the money from that, whereas, you know, YouTube takes 30% if you're a YouTube member, etc. But just wanted to mention that. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I think these builds are pretty much the best they can get. I can't really find anything that seems better than this, but I do want to say the meta overall is pretty wide open. Like, you can really use anything that feels good right now, except there's a few guns that are terrible. Like the ISO is terrible, the Cronin Squall is terrible. But things like the M13, the M4, they're competitive. They're not quite as good as the options that I gave, but if they work for you, then there's nothing wrong with using those. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.